So this is when you first drag analog into one of your tracks. This is what it'll look like, and this is what it'll sound like. Okay, it's a saw wave. As you get more familiar with the different kind of waveforms, that will help you to understand effectively the colours of sound, and once you understand the colours a bit more, you'll be able to understand what happens when you mix the colours together, and slowly you'll be able to build up a picture of what exactly constitutes a particular sound, with the ultimate goal being able to hear a sound and then being able to sit down and recreate it, or at least as closely as possible. Now there's a little feature that actually I quite often overlook because I don't use it very often anymore, but actually you probably have it open by default, and that's the little tooltip window in the bottom left here. So if we open this little tooltip window, this will tell us exactly what any parameter that we point at does. Now that's great if you understand the terms that are being used. So there may be things like, if you're pointing at something like this, transposes oscillator 1's tuning up or down in octave increments. Well, that's fine, providing you understand what a transpose means, what oscillator means, and what octave means. I'm assuming that everyone understands the other words, but of course there's always a little bit of assumption as to whether you're going to understand the terms, and of course sometimes you'll get some quite complicated explanations of what things do. But it can certainly help, and it definitely is worth having a little read of these little tooltips, just to sort of start helping build up your vocabulary and understanding of the terms. Now analog, basically the sound source for analog is an oscillator, or indeed two oscillators. These oscillators are located at the top and bottom here. It also has two filter sections, one at the top here, one at the bottom here, two amplifier sections, one at the top, one at the bottom. It has an LFO section, and then it has a master section. And then in the beginning, which I kind of omitted, it also has a noise generator. This doesn't have a separate panel in the middle when you click on it. It's simply the controls that are active here. All the others, you'll notice when I click on the box, we'll be getting a view in the middle of the device here that shows us more parameters pertaining to that feature. Now I'm just going to turn oscillator 2 off, so we've just got a single oscillator, and the way this is laid out is very much the signal path. So we've got the oscillator here, we've got the filter here, we've got the amplifier here, and then it's going out to the volume. Okay. Now, so the oscillator section, we can turn it on and off using the on-off button. We can change the volume. We can change the waveform. So we've only got a simple selection of waveforms here. We've got a sine wave, which sounds like this. Okay, we've got a saw wave, which sounds like this. And we've got a square wave, which sounds like this. Not too dissimilar to the saw wave, but it is different. And we've also got the option of having noise as well. And you'll notice with noise, it doesn't matter what note you play on the keyboard, it's the same, because noise can't be tuned. Okay, the next feature we have is an octave, and again, if we're on noise, this will make no difference. So octave is moving the pitch by 12 semitones, so a whole octave, so I can go up an octave. You won't hear anything with the noise, so let's go back to the sine wave. Okay, so that's a whole octave, that's 12 semitones. Or we can transpose it by single semitones, which is exactly the same as playing the notes up the keyboard. Okay, and we've also got detune, which moves the tuning of the note off semitones by a very small amount. Okay, you can hear that. Okay, and the other feature that we have here is this little selector here, this F1, F2. Now this simply just tells the synthesizer whether it's going to send the signal from this oscillator to filter 1, or to filter 2, or to a combination mix of the two indicated by this the value in the window here. So if we wanted it to be 50-50, it will send an equal signal to filter 1 and an equal signal to filter 2. Now, seeing as we've only got filter 1 active, I'm going to keep it on filter 1. Now, while we've clicked on this oscillator section, we can see in the middle window here we've got some other stuff. Okay, and this is actually primarily a pitch envelope. Now, we covered pitch envelopes already. It's a very simple 2-point envelope, this one. All we've got really as options to change are the pitch envelope initial value, so what pitch we're starting at, and the time, which is how long it's going to take to get from the initial value to the standard value of whatever the note is that you've played. And this is most easily illustrated by dragging this up. Okay, so you can hear, we're hearing it start at a very high pitch and then slide down quite quickly to our note. If I drag this out and make the time longer, we'll hear it like that, and if we bring it shorter, we'll start to hear it like this. And we'll also, you may also notice that now, if I move down a couple of octaves, it's quite percussive, and that's actually generating pretty much kind of a kick drum, very simple kick. So that's the pitch envelope here. Now there's some extra features underneath here. These include the pitch modulation. So again, modulation is changing the parameters in some way over time. Now here we've already got that the key is 100%, and that means that as we move up and down the keyboard, okay, let me just, I see. Okay, so the key mode here is actually defining the range of the keyboard, basically. So if we have this at 0, then all the keys on the keyboard will sound exactly the same pitch. And let me just get rid of this pitch envelope, actually. So I'm pressing any key you press will be the same note. If we put this up to 100, which is the default value, then the notes will be spread evenly across the keyboard, as you would expect. And if we push this up to 200%, then what that will do is it will shorten the range. So over 1 octave, we will actually be able to play 2 octaves worth of changes. Basically expanding the range of a keyboard. There's all sorts of various different uses for that. I don't tend to use that feature myself very much. We also have here an ability to assign an LFO. Now LFO1, it says quite clearly here, we can assign LFO1 to the pitch modulation here. Now in order to do that, let's go to the LFO section. I'm going to skip to the LFO section because it's going to be a useful tool to apply to the other sections here. And the LFO section is actually very simple on the analog. Obviously we've got to turn it on. We've got 2 LFOs, but we're just going to turn LFO1 on. Then immediately after, we've got our option between kind of free timing and synced timing, so in time with the beats. And you'll notice that our rate setting here changes accordingly from hertz to beats. Okay, I'm going to leave it as hertz. And then as I drag this up and down, you'll see the illustration in the box here, giving you an idea of what's happening to that LFO in terms of the rate that it will be modulating. Okay, we can also change the waveform here. We've got a triangle wave, we've got a rectangle wave, or a square wave. We've also got a couple of different noise waves. Now again, a reminder, these aren't actual sounds, they're just patterns to which parameters will be changed. Okay, so let's keep with something that's kind of predictable so we can hear what's going on. And then we're going to, let's just leave these other settings for now. And, oops, go up here. Okay, so let's go back to the oscillator 1 section. Now that LFO1 is on, you'll notice that LFO1 here, which was previously greyed out, there's now an option to add a value to it. So this is our amount. Remembering when we're changing, when we're applying modulations, usually at somewhere there's an amount, and that dictates how much of whatever the parameter change, the envelope or the LFO, how much of that is going to be affecting the given parameter. Okay. Okay. If we just go quickly back to the LFO here, we can change the parameters here. And I think this is a really good point to just illustrate some of the other features in the LFO here, apart from the waveform and the width, which actually, sorry, the width won't have any effect unless you've chosen a rectangle wave. And the rectangle wave, you can see how the width affects that value change. So it'll stay at the off value or the lowest minimum value for longer than it will stay at the maximum value. And if we go the other way, we'll invert that. Okay. and then 50% is equal time at maximum and equal time at minimum value. Let's go back to sine though. Okay, now the retrigger mode here will basically retrigger the envelope, retrigger the LFO when a new note is played, as opposed to continuing the LFO from its existing position. Okay, if we leave it off. Okay, now the offset is, again, if we think of this one cycle on this waveform as being 360 degrees, then this simply offsets the beginning. As you can see, if we imagine that the trigger point is the very beginning of this waveform, as I move the offset, you'll see it's going to start at a different value. 360 would be there. Okay, 270 would be there, 180 would be there, 90 would be there, and 0 would be there. Now we have two other parameters here. One is delay, and that's basically the amount of time after I launch it, after I play a note, that the LFO becomes active. So if I turn the delay up to like 1.5 seconds, you'll hear after the note's played. It takes a while for it to kick in, but it kicks in instantly. After 1.5 seconds, it starts becoming active. And the attack here is basically the slope of that. So once it starts to become active, how long it then takes to go from minimum value, sort of minimum range modulation, to maximum range. So if I put this up to a second, you'll hear what happens. We'll get 1 second where nothing happens, and then another second where it slowly goes from a small amount of LFO to full. Okay, right, so those are the two values there, quite useful. In fact, let's leave those set. Those are milliseconds. Oh, interesting. Okay, cool. So we'll leave that like that, and then we'll go back. Let's go back to the oscillator section. So the pulse width, again, we can't change the pulse width unless we are using a rectangle wave, in which case the pulse width will become active. So although I can't show you that illustratively here, it's exactly the same setting as this one here with the pulse width. So it's simply changing the length of time that either the maximum or minimum value is held. Okay, let's go back to the oscillator. Just turn the LFO off. And you can hear how that does this classic kind of rectangle sound. Okay, and again we can apply LFO to this if the LFO is on. Okay. If I go back to, if I just take the LFO off this, and I'm also going to go back and take these down to 0 so the LFO activates immediately. Okay. And again you can invert these values too. Okay, the next thing here is we've got a sub-oscillator, or a sync. So that basically decides whether this particular oscillator is going to be a sub, so it's kind of another oscillator that's tuned 1 octave below, or whether it's going to be synchronized, so basically it's going to be at the same in phase, if you like, with the with another additional oscillator. So there's kind of, it's like stacking two oscillators, and you can either have it as an octave below or you can have it the same octave. So this is with a sub octave. I need to turn it up obviously. So you can hear that's now 2 waves, one an octave lower. Or we can have it as a sync wave. And that's just the ratio between the two, the synchronized one and the initial. Okay, I'm going to put it back to sub. Great, so let's just add another, let's just have a little play with this pitch envelope again. And go back to my LFO, and I'm just going to add a little bit of cool, so that's most of the parameters there. All those parameters are identical with oscillator 2. Now if we turn oscillator 2 on, we'll immediately get some stacking of those oscillators. And if I put this onto a sine, maybe knock it down an octave. Repeated the process, so now I'm stacking up basically 4 oscillators, even though there's only 2 here. We're using the sub oscillators. I might try this as a sync oscillator actually. And you'll notice that on this, the only difference, observable difference between oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 is that in oscillator 2 you can only apply LFO2. So if I had to turn LFO2 on before I can even do that, then go in here and all of these LFO options are highlighted, so I can start applying LFO to Okay, so currently, if we just have a little recap on this F1, F2 here, we'll see that both these oscillators are assigned to go to filter 1. So the signals from both of these and their respective sub and sync oscillators are going into filter 1. So if we now go to filter 1, we can choose from a variety of different filters here, including some kind of interesting formant filters. I'm going to just stick with a classic low pass. And we've got our resonance here. Okay, to do that kind of thing. Okay. Now there's an option here that says 2F2, so that's then sending the signal from filter 1 to filter 2 by either 0% of it or 100% of it. Of course, filter 2 has to be active, at the moment it's not. So it doesn't matter what that setting is, nothing's going to change. But let's just have a look in the middle window here, now that we've selected filter 1. Again, we'll see some familiar stuff, lots of little boxes. Here's an envelope though, so this is our filter envelope. Now if I'll try and apply a filter envelope that we'll be able to hear. Okay, so you can hear I've applied a kind of a slow attack over 1.5 seconds or 1 and a bit seconds. So you can hear when I first hit the note, it's filtered, so the filter frequency is at like 4767, and then over the 1.5 seconds, it's opening up. So the filter's opening up to here, and then following that, it's decaying back down over another second. We like these seconds because it's kind of nice and easy to hear. And then there's a release as well. But if we put this sustain value at about half, okay, so we can hear it opening up for a second, and then over another second, it's kind of dropping down to about half the value, halfway between the minimum and maximum value, minimum being this one here. And then after I've let go of the note, it's then tailing off over another second and lowering back down to the initial value. All of those values are represented by numbers here. There's no real difference. The linear versus exponential view here, it simply just shows you either a linear versus exponential graph. of course, because an exponential curve is able to curve, so you get this different distribution of values, whereas linear will be exactly that. There'll be a linear. Okay. We've also got legato mode, which is the same as legato mode in almost anything else, which means that when we press the next note, it will simply pick up from where the previous note stopped in relation to the position in this envelope. When it's off, then every time I hit a new note, this envelope is triggered again. Okay, so it's like starting quiet and then getting louder. With legato on, okay, they're all picking up from the position of the envelope. Now, free basically removes the sustain part of this waveform, and that enables us to just have the attack and decay. So I think it's attack and decay, or attack, decay, and maybe perhaps the release. But basically it removes any sustain section, and what that means is that it doesn't matter how long I press the note, it's only going to make a sound, or it's only going to activate this envelope for as long as the sum of the attack time, decay time, and release time. In essence, that just means that holding the note down won't change anything to do with the filter envelope, and this is kind of used a lot with sort of percussive sounds. See, it's going all the way down to the release, back down to the bottom value, but it's taking 2 seconds to do it because there's a second of decay, and there's a second of release, but it's not staying in position. If I turn the free off and hold the note again, see, it's holding the note at the sustain value, and then it's letting it drop off down to the initial frequency after I let go. Because when it's on, it goes all the way up, and then it comes all the way back down, even though I'm holding the note. Okay, so we'll leave those off for now. There's a few more features here. Envelope to velocity. So this is kind of how hard you hit the key is then going to dictate how much of the envelope is being applied. Now, if I use the push, if I press it really gently, I mean, this is on 0, so it doesn't matter how hard I press the note, the filter envelope will be applied the same amount. If I turn this right up, so if I hit it gently now, it's only using it's basically applying this filter envelope, but only a small amount. So it's basically reducing the range of the filter envelope. And if I hit it really hard, then it's extending the range of the filter envelope. So the minimum and maximum values will be much further apart. Okay, I'm going to leave that back at 0 again. And then we've got one more feature here, and this is kind of a drive feature. So this is essentially a kind of distortion. Which you can hear quite clearly. And then we've got two sort of little subsections here, frequency modulation and resonance modulation. So as opposed to just being able to modulate the frequency, the cutoff frequency, which is typically what a filter envelope does, we're also able to control the resonance using this envelope too, and also other things like the LFO and the key range. So the LFO, as we've already explained, is going to apply LFO to the frequency modulation, so the cutoff frequency. Okay, and in a similar sense, the LFO here will apply that to the resonance. Okay, we can get some really analog squeaky noises doing that. The key is again how much the position on the keyboard affects it. If we turn this all the way up to 4, then playing really low notes, give us a kind of really a much shorter parameter range. Whereas higher notes will give us and the same goes for the key range on the resonance here. And the envelope here is, of course, how much of this envelope is being applied to this parameter. So if I turn this down to 0, I'm just getting LFO now from the oscillator section here. I'm not getting any filter envelope. I can apply that filter envelope to the resonance, or I can apply it to both of them. Okay, and that's pretty much essentially. I'm going to leave those up actually. There is one other feature here. It's a little bit unusual or out of the box, and that's the loop function. So when I'm holding down a note, basically this is dictating how if the filter envelope is being looped at all. So whether it's linear, so it can just be it's active and then 1 second up, 1 second decay, and then sustain for however long you hold the note, and then release for a second. Or you can choose from these 3 different kind of hold or release modes. Now ADR, basically when you're holding down the note, will loop the attack and decay stage, and then when you let go it will play the release stage. So it's kind of like combining, it's turning the filter envelope into a kind of filter LFO, but one that's a little bit more complicated because it can have a tail. So I hold down the note, and what happens is that I'll get a second of attack, a second of decay, and then it'll loop again, a second of attack, a second of decay. Now let me actually turn it on. And then when I let go, it's going to play the release. This one plays the attack, decay, release, and then and loops that, and then plays the release afterwards. So that would be a second of attack, a second of decay, a second of release, ignoring the sustain section, and then doing that again and again until I let go, and then playing the release section again at the end. And the third one, I think, I'm not 100% sure actually, it does loop. It says here, look, here you go, info view. On the left, ADS, AR, no loop, but the attack and release phases repeat once when the key is released. So this is actually repeating the attack and release after I let go of the note. So, which we won't hear unless we've got a longer amplitude envelope. So let's come back to that in a second. I'm going to leave this on, let's leave it on this mode. Now, so that's all of the stuff in the filter section. The next section here is the amplitude section, so the amplitude envelope, if you like. So at this stage we've got oscillator 1, oscillator 2, both being fed into filter 1, and then that's going into amplitude into the amplify envelope here. Of course, common with the amplify envelope, we've got a volume selector, and I better leave that quite low. And we've got a pan for left and right, and in the centre here we've got a whole bunch of other stuff. That's almost identical to the settings in the filter envelope. I think even these ones are the same, yeah. The only difference being that in the bottom here we have the pan modulation and level modulation. So whereas in the filter we have the ability to assign LFO, key range and envelope to the frequency, or LFO, key range and envelope to the resonance. With the amplifier we have the option of assigning those to either the pan or the volume. Let's just do the volume because that'd be super obvious. And we can apply that LFO to the pan as well. Okay, so and that is essentially exactly the same. Now the only other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the sustain up, and I'm going to turn the decay, the release time up to like 3 seconds. So that when I let go of the note, we can hear this, the effect of the attack and release section of the envelope repeating after I've let go of the note. It's kind of subtle, and if you do this with a simpler sound, you'll be able to figure that out. Okay, so we go. Anything else here that's different? No, it's pretty much exactly the same otherwise. already we've built up quite a nasty patch there. I'm going to turn the release down just a touch. Okay, so after the amplitude amplifier envelope here, we're then going into the master, into the volume section here, the master section. We've covered the LFO section. So let's go on to the master section here, the volume. We've got the main volume here, and then we've got some other features. Some of the controls are here in the end box, but there's also some extra controls here in the left. Now I'm going to go through all of the other stuff first, and then I'll come back to the quick routing at the end. So top of the list here we've got vibrato, and vibrato is kind of like wobble, if you like. If you were to wobble your finger on a string of a guitar or a violin after you played a note, then you would get a bit of vibrato. I'm going to turn the LFOs off. And you have a rate for that too, and I'm sure you can hear that. Okay, we've also got, well, let's just have a look at this. We've also got some other parameters for vibrato in this section here, and that's a delay, which is exactly the same as the LFO delay. It's how long before the vibrato comes active. So I can set that to a second or so. And then you hear, after a second or so, you hear the vibrato become active. I can then select how long it takes before vibrato starts. After the vibrato starts, for it to come to full vibrato. Okay, and then we've also got a couple of other little kind of interesting features here. Error, because this is supposed to be an analog synth, it's supposed to emulate to some degree the fact that analog devices or analog machines do introduce inherently a little bit of kind of error. And that's what this does. It basically just adds a little bit of kind of randomness to the to all of the parameters to do with vibrato. And the other one here is basically amount to the modulation wheel. So if you have a mod wheel on your keyboard, then you can use that to trigger vibrato. And we're not going to do that because we don't have a mod wheel attached at the moment. Okay, same with the keyboard. So the keyboard here is just giving you some overall keyboard controls. You've got your pitch bend range. You've got stretch feature here, which actually I'm not 100%. Oh yes, so stretch basically it just does this weird thing where if you it's kind of to emulate some kind of analog detuning thing, whereas you play higher notes on the scale, they become progressively sharper. They move away from the true tone to slightly sharper. And as you play lower keys on the keyboard, they become slightly flatter the further away you move from kind of middle C. We've got another error option here, which does a similar thing. It just introduces some error to these parameters. We've also got an overall octave, so we can change the octave of pretty much the entire keyboard. So that would be the same as changing both of these simultaneously, although it's independent of those. And then the same with the semitone and the detune. Then we've also got here a section for voices. So typically a lot of analog, well not a lot of, but a good deal of analog synths are mono or monophonic, which means they can only play one note at a time, and we do have that option here. But we can also have up to 32 voices, which is 32 notes played simultaneously, and that should give us some pretty big sounds. Okay, now if you remember that in terms of voices, we've already got 1, 2 here, but both of these primary oscillators also have their sub or sync oscillators enabled, so we've actually already got 4 for every note that I press. So if I wanted to press 2 keys simultaneously and hear all of those, I would need 8. If I wanted to play 3 keys, I would need 12. 4 keys would be 16. So, you know, a chord is using for 16 voices at the moment. Let's just turn those LFOs back on for some fun. Okay, so that's our voices. And then what we have under here is a priority. So if, for example, we've got this set to 4 voices, and then we want to play a couple of different notes, then it's going to have to decide which notes not to play. And this just basically sets the priority. So the priority being last, which means the last note that was played will have priority. Or you can set it to low, which means the lowest note that you've played has priority, or high, which is the highest note has priority. Okay. The next thing down here on the right in the main section is the unison. Now unison basically then adds an extra chain of voices. Okay, and we've also got an option to double that to 4. And you'll hear that when we activate unison, immediately the sound becomes thicker because we've doubled everything up, and then we can apply an amount of detuning to the second group of voices, if you like, and that will give us these kind of much bigger sounds. And of course it will give us these really discordant sounds if we start really detuning the second stack of voices. Let's ramp that up to 4, and let's put these voices up to full bore. Okay, my output's actually getting pretty loud here, so I'm going to knock this down by a few dB. Okay, the last feature on the bottom here is, oh sorry, there's one more thing under the unison here, and that's the delay. So that's the amount of time after you hit the note. Oh no, sorry, this is actually kind of offset, if you like. So it's how long after you hit the first trigger, the initial group of voices, does the set of unison voices take to kick in. It kind of has the effect of overall smudging the sound a bit, but it makes it bigger, and it can also give the impression of much greater stereo width, because if you've got lots of modulations happening that involve moving things left and right and filtering, and one set of voices is playing slightly later than the other, then you kind of have everything becomes slightly offset, so you have this kind of richening and thickening of the sound overall. The final one here is the glide mode. So we can have glide, we can set the amount of time that the glide takes. So that's when I press one note, then the next note, the pitch will slide between the two, and this simply dictates how long that would be. And again, legato mode, which we've come across many times now, is just a case of the glide will just pick up from where will pick up. Once you press the next note, it will pick up from the position it's already at, so it will make it, rather than re-triggering, it will just continue to slide from wherever you are to the next note. Okay, great, so we've pretty much stacked up all of that, and the only other parameter that you have available under glide is the mode, which is either constant or proportional, and this is just to do with the amount of time that the gliding takes. So if the constant value, it will stick at a constant similar value, and if it's proportional, then it changes depending on the speed at which you're playing, I believe. And we can actually just check that I'm correct there. Here we go. Constant. Glide time is constant regardless of the interval between the notes. In proportional mode, the glide time is slower. Yeah, so if you're playing faster, it will make the glide time respond to that by gliding a little bit quicker or a little bit slower. Okay, so that's nearly everything. Now the last thing to explain is just to go through these extra kind of grayed out sections, because we have an extra filter here and we have an extra amplifier. And what we can do is we can either send oscillator 1 through filter 1 through amplifier 1 into the master section, and we can send oscillator 2 through filter 2 into amplifier 2 and then out through the volume master section. Or we've got a bunch of other routing options. So and these can be activated using the filter assigns, the filter 1 to filter 2 here, and also the slave button here, which basically links the cutoff frequency of filter A and filter B, and then it makes the cutoff frequency of filter 2 actually, rather than set the cutoff frequency, just sets the difference between the cutoff of 1 and 2. Now, in order to make these routings a little bit quicker to set up, in the master section here we've got these quick routing buttons, and you can see here that these kind of graphically represent these various routing options. So with option A, we're basically getting 2 discrete channels. We're getting oscillator, filter, amp out, and then oscillator, filter, amp out. Sounds like this. Okay. Or we can go for option 2 here, which is both oscillators, and you'll notice how all these on-off sections get turned on and off and values change. So oscillator 1 and 2 are both going into filter 1, then into amplifier 1 and then out, and that was where we started, so this was the option we started with. Sounds like this, as opposed to this. Option 3 here is that there's a transition, there's a sharing of the oscillator signal from 1 and 2 into both filter 1 and filter 2. And if I go to it and click on it, you'll notice that what it actually does here is it turns filter 2 and amp 2 on, and it sets F1, F2 ratios here and here to 50-50. Okay, slightly different. You can kind of hear how that's working, but in a way it's summing both of these oscillators and putting them both through F1 and A1, and also putting an equal signal through F2 and A2. The final routing option here is that we have both the oscillators go into filter 1, and then filter 1 then goes into filter 2, and then it goes through amplifier 2 and out. And that's going to sound like this. Difficult to hear the exact difference between those, but there is a difference, and depending on the patch that you're using, you will be able to hear that difference, either less or more. So that's pretty much an overview of every parameter that there is in analog, except for the noise here. Sorry, I've completely forgot that. Noise just adds an extra bit of noise to the signal. And if I turn off some of these LFOs in the hope that we'll maybe be able to hear. You can hear. You can hear that we're adding some kind of, we are adding actual white noise to that. Let's give an example of what that might be used for. Is if we turn all these off and we go for routing option 1. So we're getting oscillator 1 going to filter 1 to amplifier 1, but we're just using the noise gate here. So turn off the vibrato. Turn down the release. Perhaps turn the tape. Well, it just adds an extra dimension to the sound, really. There's a lot you can do with that. And that pretty much sums up everything that you can do with analog. The best way to figure out or to learn more about it is to simply play around with it.